as investors, a lot of you may already know this, but we walk a very small tightrope. When we make this initial offer and when we set the initial anchor, because if you go in and you set the initial anchor too low, you may burn the bridge up front before there's even an opportunity to create value, build rapport, and put a deal together. But if you go in and on the flip side, you anchor your price too high when the seller may already be thinking of a lower price, you've shot yourself in the foot by paying way more or setting yourself up for failure to pay way more than you could have gotten the deal for. And so again, it comes down to kind of reverse engineering and building your framework up front, knowing what your ZOPA is, knowing what your BATNA is, going in with that framework of, where do I need this to fall into to where it gets my foot in the door? I just need to get my foot in the door. I don't want it slammed in my face. I just want to get in there because I know once I'm in there, once I've got one foot in, I can work on all of these other things and implement all of these other tactics to get a win-win deal done. All right, welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. And today we are back with our monthly book review episode. And today we're back with a really, really solid book today. I'm excited because I view this book as kind of the next level step up to probably our most recommended book thus far that we've talked about. And this book is recommended by the Harvard Business School. We spent a lot of time listening and talking about concepts about this book. And we think that all of the negotiation strategies outlined in this book are going to help you guys absolutely crush your appointments, crush your negotiations in everyday life. And so let's jump into it, dude. Scott, before I name the title of this book, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Yeah, you guys got to strap in. This is like the sequel to Never Split the Difference.
Yep.
It's not by the same author. It's not by the same group, but I think this is the step up. And so if you haven't read Never Split the Difference, I recommend that book first and then read this book.
Well, and I think you put it, when we were talking about this and going through our notes, you put it in a really good phrase. What did you say? You said Never Split the Difference was more focused on the actual conversational piece.
It's what
right?
words to say.
What words to say. And I think our book we're talking about today, which is Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, I think elevates that and takes it to a more technical level, which I think for both of us and for anyone out there who already has kind of that baseline understanding and skill of negotiation that you may have taken from Never Split the Difference and some other places, I think this is a game changer to get, your skills elevated. And so let's jump into it, dude.
Yeah, I think before we start with the actual sections of this book, one thing to note, one thing to note is that our negotiation style has stagnated since reading Never Split the Difference. There was a big bump, and we've kind of just plateaued and used the same negotiating techniques. And the impetus for reading this specific book was you and I discussed that right now deals are becoming more difficult to make sense because sellers are still holding strong on their price. And so we said the best way to solve that is to learn how to better negotiate and have more tools in the toolbox so you can monetize more leads. So if you're noticing that you're having a hard time with sellers and their pricing or their terms or dealing with negotiations, not a hard time finding leads, this is probably a great solution for you.
Absolutely. And I think it's a perfect segue into, we're going to break up this review into a couple parts, with part one focusing on actual strategies for success in negotiations. And we've got 6 of them we'll go through and kind of highlight what was talked about in the book, and then also relate that to examples that we're dealing with in our day-to-day, talking with sellers, exactly like you said, who may not be budging on their price and making it, a little bit more difficult to put some deals together. That's it. So first strategy is called seizing the frame. And I really like this one because, they're in the book, it said negotiation begins even before you step up to the table, right? Even before you go to that appointment and talk with the seller, there's homework behind the scenes. You've got to build that framework before stepping into the actual red hot negotiations, right? And how that framework and how that prep time can affect direct negotiations once it's time to come to the table.
Yeah. And just like right now, you're looking on a video that's framed in, you don't know what exactly is going on outside of this picture. Mm-hmm. And that may be true for who you're negotiating against. You need to be well learned in the entire situation at hand. That comes from a lot of research, a lot of homework, a lot of preparation. And then when you get to the actual negotiating table, you can then decide what framework we're going to work within. And the best example of setting the frame is leading with the first offer, or setting an anchor is another term that they talk about a lot in the book that you should know about. And that means before you give your counterpart the opportunity to set the framework, you can set the framework in a way that's advantageous for you. If you're a buyer, that may mean that you off the bat ask for what I would call unreasonable demands, say a low price, or that may be really beneficial terms for you. Or if you're a seller, it's the opposite. Listings, you start with a high price on your listing, you're setting the framework of where that house will sell at. You're not leaving it up for ambiguity to let a buyer come in low and set a deep anchor in the negotiations.
Yeah, I think looking at it, from a bird's eye view, this really is just setting expectations for the other party, right? And exactly like we're talking about, if we're a potential buyer for a property that the seller's looking to, sell for cash, quick as is and stuff like that, at the bare minimum upfront, setting those expectations with the seller, I can't, underlie how important that is, because if you step in and you kind of let the seller strong arm you and you let the seller run the show, the probability of a deal becomes a lot less likely. So being able to set those expectations for the seller up front, right? Of course, in addition to being open and honest, fact finding, building rapport, it's just setting those realistic expectations for the seller. If you're looking to sell your property, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't sell it quick, as is, and expect to get a retail price, right? And you phrased that in a way, I think, when you had an appointment recently, where explaining that to the seller up front, or explaining to, an agent who's bringing a deal, hey, it sounds like your seller wants retail price with the convenience of a cash offer. And before we get any further, we've just got to set the expectations that that's not really going to work here.
Yeah. Well, I even went a step further. I said, if you could get a retail price with the convenience of my offer, both of us would be out of business, because there would be no need for realtors or investors if there was a buyer who could do both. The other part to it too, just thinking about expectations, I know a lot of people struggle with those really strong-headed sellers who want to dominate the conversation. By setting up a framework, you can niche down what exactly we can talk about. And so, especially like what you're talking about, hitting price up front, it's important to lead with a low number and say, this is what other people are paying, because now you've set a deep anchor. If they let you go to the house, I don't want to say that you're guaranteed to get a price that makes sense, but you're much more likely to have a successful negotiation because you've already set the framework for a lower price before you went to the house.
Absolutely. 100%. Jumping over to strategy 2, is knowing your BATNA. And some of you may have heard this term before, but BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement, right? And that's just coming down to recognizing and knowing the importance of your alternatives. And if you're looking at it from a seller standpoint, right? if, I'm the seller and you're the buyer and we're negotiating and I know I have another offer that's not quite where I want it. I want you to come in and beat his offer, but we can't put something together. My best alternative to a negotiated agreement would be going back to this potential buyer and either putting a deal together or try to squeeze a couple extra $1,000 out of that price. Right.
Yeah.
And from the buyer's standpoint, it could be, hey, if I don't put something together with the seller, my best alternative may be I'm also talking with this lead, with this seller on this address, right? If I can't put something together here, my next best bet is to go try and put something together over here with this seller, right? But knowing that while you're building your framework before you go into the negotiating table can really help you put things into perspective and give you an upper hand in the negotiations.
Yeah, referring back to never split the difference, he talks about a ZOPA, a zone of possible opportunity, or a zone of possible agreement. And again, when we go on our appointments, we, being the professionals, help sellers very often figure out what their BATNA is. For most sellers that we're negotiating a real estate deal with, their BATNA is a listing because they would like the convenience of working with us, but at the end of the day, they have a backup option of going with the realtor. Because you and I are both realtors, we always go with what we call the consultative approach, and we help provide them with a BATNA, and we explain what exactly their worst case scenario is. If you were to list it and deal with the headaches, what would you make? The one thing to clarify that this is not a ZOPA is that we often still pay less than what their best alternative solution is. As the buyer ourselves, I preach this to everybody. A bad deal is worse than no deal. Just know that at the end of the day, you'd rather keep your money in your pocket than chance it on a really skinny deal and lose money, which is very common. And so on the buyer's perspective, like you mentioned, you have other leads, or even if you don't have other leads, the money that you have today could be used for marketing to find more leads. And so when you go into a negotiation, your BATNA is often referred to now as the MAO, your max allowable offer, because you have done your research and you know what you need to pay. And if you go below your MAO, you now need to refer back to not buying the deal. Or if you go higher than your MAO, you should refer back to not buying the deal unless you find or discover new information that really legitimately moves your MAO. You should not be allowing your max offer to exceed the information that you diligently research before you go. A lot of the times, and we'll talk about it in cognitive biases later in the book, we as investors think, well, I've already spent all this time figuring all this out and we want to stretch. And that is the biggest reason why people lose money in our industry, is that they sink more money into a deal than they should have because they sunk a little bit of time at the beginning.
Well, and not only that, but especially for newer investors who have kind of the jitters and the itch of just wanting to get the high of inking and signing a deal, that you can kind of torpedo yourself that way. Because if you constantly, not only are you not going to be able to get the deal dispoed if you're looking to start in wholesaling, right? But you're going to garner the reputation of a dude who sends out bad deals that don't have any meat on the bone.
That's it.
And after, enough times of that, when you do finally get a good deal, you may have already burned, the bridge a little bit to where everybody sees your name, pops up on an email or a text and goes, not this dude again, right? All he does is send out bad deals. I was talking with that to somebody the other day. They had gotten a text while we were out at a coffee appointment from a wholesaler, and they're like, dude, said exactly that. This dude only sends me bad deals. I'm not even going to respond. And you don't want to find yourself caught in that spiraling torpedo down just to get the ink on the contract.
Would you rather look rich or be rich?
That's all. Literally, that's what it comes down to. Exactly.
Strategy number 3, leverage your strengths. This is an important part because every person in our industry has different strengths and weaknesses, and every seller has unique difficulties and challenges. If you're a realtor like Kate or I, You can go in with the strength of helping them understand what their alternative opportunities are. If you are a guy who has a lot of connections with moving companies or that's been your niche, well, there's a lot of sellers who, if you could pay for their moving costs, they would sell to you for a much cheaper price. If you're a guy who has an extensive network out of state and they're moving out of state, you may get the deal because you are leveraging your strength in the negotiation as a unique proposition value. I think the main takeaway I took from this section is provide a very tailored proposition value that doesn't just contain cash as is, covering all the closing costs and commissions, but that is uniquely set up to tie directly to the struggles that you're hearing the seller say. Again, negotiation is an information game. If you can do diligent research, develop relationships, by the time you get to the negotiation table, 80% of the work is done. Now you're just coming to a number.
That is exactly it. And I hear this frequently, and I know how it feels because I know we both went through this, right? It is hard to figure out what your individual personalized value proposition can be, right? Because you hit the nail on the head. Everybody and their mom is offering cash as is, can close quickly, right? Everybody's got those same key parts of their value proposition. It's figuring out what individual specialty, what individual thing can you add to the value proposition that makes you unique from every other mom and pop investor that's lined up at this seller's door trying to, get this deal, right? You've got to figure out, by not only building rapport and listening to the seller, you've got to figure out what your strengths are and lean into those hard. And I think you named off some great examples of some ways that you can get the upper hand in building your value proposition when you're negotiating with a seller.
Let me tag on to that too. By setting yourself apart from the other cash as is buyers, you make the seller's BATNA, best alternative, much less desirable without degrading the BATNA. Mm-hmm. So in our example, we are realtors. We don't talk poorly on realtors, but we explain that realtors cannot do a lot of what we're doing. Realtors have the problem right now that the market is not as strong as it was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And so when we talk with them, we can guarantee that we're going to pay this price. We can guarantee that we're going to take it as is. And they have that in their head that it's a done deal, versus when we refer back to a listing or they ask questions about a listing, we explain the process of listing a home. It requires some preparation work. It requires people coming through your home and looking at the property. It requires you to negotiate with a buyer at the start of escrow, then get inspections, then deal with the second phase of negotiations, then deal with an appraiser, which most of these homes won't appraise as is. And then you're going to have to do repairs to the home. And then at that point, you're locked in. So they realize that their best alternative may net them a higher price, but it's going to be a lot of stress and headache, which most people who call us are concerned about the stress and headache, not as much about the price.
Exactly. And that rolls into our next strategy, right? Diffusing the fears of the other party, right? And you just named off, some concerns that sellers frequently bring up while we're at the negotiating table. And an example I can think of here, right, that we've dealt with is a lot of sellers may have already gone into contract with another investor, one of these newbie guys, or even a seasoned, investor, and had that bridge burned. This investor was promising the world, under-delivered, and ended up, either hammering a price reduction that the seller said no way, or backing out and canceling the deal entirely, wasting, precious time that, the seller can't afford to get back, right? And this is a very intricate situation because not only do you have to, be empathetic, but you also have to strategize here. It's like, when you send in the bomb squad to defuse a bomb, right? It's almost like that, because if you hit a pain point too hard, there's no way of coming back from that in a negotiation with the seller, right?
That's
so it's being able to diffuse those fears and reassure the seller that you are the right person to put together this contract with and move forward with and get the deal done.
Yeah, and maintaining your composure, just like the bomb squad. They're not panicked. They're here to do a mission, right? In regards to this exact situation, which you and I have dealt with a lot, I had a negotiation literally yesterday or the day before about this same situation. A seller had already gone in contract twice at higher prices. I had talked to him from the start. Every time he called me, I always acknowledged, hey, dude, that sucks that it fell apart. Our price is still here. We would love to do the deal. But if you want to chance it again with another buyer who's willing to pay a lot more, he's an investor. At the end of the day, the seller's an investor. I said, at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers. And you may find somebody who's willing to buy this property, not realizing they're going to take a loss. But if you want to sell it to somebody that you trust is going to get the deal done because you want to get your 1031 done, we're ready to go at this price point. And he ended up taking an offer from somebody that was over 30,000 higher than ours. So we were in the low 60s. He took something in the high 90s. And on the market right now, there are 7 houses that were purchased in the last 6 months, and the sellers are selling for less than they paid for the home 6 months ago. And I told him, I said, this is a red flag, man. If the buyer has not seen this, they will once they're in contract. And what are the likelihoods that they're going to pay that price? And he's going for it again, and that's okay. Like you said, you can't press too hard on some of these sensitive issues. And if it falls apart again, my case is even stronger and my price will be lower.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important part at the end of the day, because not only does it allow the opportunity to put the potential deals together, you have to allow, we can say all of the things we want, but sometimes a seller has to figure out and go through it themselves before they're ready to listen and really recognize what's going on, which sounds like the case that this seller's going through.
And it demonstrates credibility. If you can accurately predict what will happen and it happens, it makes your really low number seem a lot more legitimate because you've now predicted accurately what will happen.
Dude, this next strategy was a really cool one to listen and learn about. And it's called log rolling, and it's a very interesting concept. And I'll read word for word, and then we'll dive into it. Log rolling is a negotiation exchange concessions or make trade-offs on different issues to reach a mutually beneficial agreement. And this essentially means instead of focusing on one issue or one point of the negotiation, take for example price, log rolling makes you take a step back, look at it from a bird's eye view, and try and negotiate other aspects at the same time, and log roll or make more things come together in negotiating different points, whether it's price and escrow time frame or this, that, and the other. It's focusing on more things at once than just focusing on just one thing at a time.
And let's talk about the next strategy at the same time. It's called value creation. A lot of people feel as if it's a net zero sum gain, and they believe that every dollar that I get less or every dollar that the seller gets more reverses the other person's profit. And that doesn't have to be the case. The value of log rolling is discovering who values what more and creating a situation where both people get more of what they want and less of what they don't want. So, for example, this is a really easy one that came to mind, is you're negotiating on somebody's rental property. They don't want to deal with the house anymore. You are planning to flip the home. As long as the numbers make sense, you will flip this home. And as long as the seller is done with the house, he will sell the home. But you're caught up because the seller wants a higher price and you want the tenant out. Well, if you go back and look at the numbers, you can reduce the cost of your flip if the tenant is vacated before you close escrow. You can log roll the negotiation and say, I want, and the log rolling comes from, I guess it was from lumberjacks who borrowed each other who helped each other move heavy logs by rolling them together versus everybody rolling them alone. So what you do, you go to the seller and you say, I would like to give you a higher purchase price so that you're happy with the deal. And in return, I would just like that you help me get the tenant out of the home so that when we close escrow, I can immediately start working on it. both parties come out better this way. The seller gets a higher price, and you get to get a deal that makes sense because you now don't have to deal with the $10,000 to evict the person and the multiple months of holding. So in this situation, you take a step back when you get to that rock solid, I'm at 160, they're at 180, and you say, I could get to the 180 if you could help me get the tenant out. And this person, the seller, likely has a relationship with the tenant that's more influential than your relationship with the tenant. Mm-hmm. And so if all of a sudden you can log roll those two terms together, the seller gets a higher price, you get an easier flip, everybody comes out better.
And I think that's a perfect example of breaking down something that's called the fixed pie bias, which is, the incorrect belief that there's only a certain amount of value, or there's only a certain amount of pieces of the pie that can be taken in a negotiation. In that example, right, a lot of people may view it as zero sum, right? If the seller is gaining $1, I'm losing $1. If I'm getting a lower price, the seller's losing by X amount, right? But by breaking down the bias that there's only a fixed amount of the pie, by stepping back and taking a bird's eye view and seeing what can I log roll to value create for both sides to have it be a win-win, that's the differentiator and how you may be able to set yourself apart with your value proposition.
That's it. And a good negotiator is good at beating down a specific topic to whatever they want. A negotiation genius is good at getting everybody solutions that they're happy with. Another example, because this is an important thing for you guys to fully hit and understand. We have a deal right now where there are two separate parties that hate each other. We are looking to buy the home. We are dealing with a complex negotiation. The biggest concern for us is that we do not know if the well and septic tank are functioning. They are concerned about getting some money to move to the next place. We log rolled, giving them cash for keys if they give us access to the well and septic to do inspections in escrow. Everybody comes out better. We, if the well and septic come out clean, can give them more than that they originally wanted and give them some money to move. And on the flip side, we have less risk going into a flip, which means we know more certainly what's going to happen once we take ownership of the home, and we're more confident that this deal will make a profit.
Absolutely. Let's transition into the second part of our book.
Before you jump into this, because the book really talked about this before they started talking about the actual sections, we are going to talk about biases. Spend this portion of the podcast reflecting internally about how you are affected by these biases. Then you can apply them to other people. But a lot of people will immediately jump to other people are biased. And you need to understand the purpose of this portion is to figure out what things affect you, not what things affect the seller. Okay, now go.
Absolutely. Okay. Bias number one we're going to talk about, which we've already talked about a little bit already, is anchoring. And I think, as investors, a lot of you may already know this, but we walk a very small tightrope. When we make this initial offer and when we set the initial anchor, because if you go in and you set the initial anchor too low, you may burn the bridge up front before there's even an opportunity to create value, build rapport, and put a deal together. But if you go in and on the flip side, you anchor your price too high when the seller may already be thinking of a lower price, you've shot yourself in the foot by paying way more or setting yourself up for failure to pay way more than you could have gotten the deal for. And so, again, it comes down to kind of reverse engineering and building your framework up front, knowing what your ZOPA is, knowing what your BATNA is, going in with that framework of, where do I need this to fall into to where it gets my foot in the door? I just need to get my foot in the door. I don't want it slammed in my face. I just want to get in there because I know once I'm in there, once I've got one foot in, I can work on all of these other things and implement all of these other tactics to get a win-win deal done.
Yeah. I mean, looking internally and reflecting on how this affects me, I've noticed that when I have a really aggressive seller who has a very high price, my mindset shifts to trying to figure out how to reach that price, not figuring out how to get him to come to my price. I'm very susceptible to anchoring, and learning how to take that punch in the face and keep going is important. You mentioned something very important, which was you're walking a tightrope in regards to how low of a price you can start with. This was one of the best tips about anchoring in this book. Make sure that you have data-driven evidence on why your anchor is so low, because if the other side calls you out for being negotiating in bad faith, and you do not have a legitimate reason for why your price was where it was, all of a sudden, you could lose the deal. If you start with an offer at 116, but you can provide reasons because the rehab estimate is very large and you can spell it out to them, or resale comps are lower than what they think they are, or you've recently done a few deals in the area and this is the price point that you've typically paid in this area of town. If you cannot do that, you jeopardize the relationship you've built.
Yeah, absolutely. And segueing into what they call a confirmation bias, right? Which is where, we're seeking information that confirms what our preconceived notions were, right? And I equate this to, a bias where you could be kind of flying by the edge of your seat with your blinders on, right? Because you may be so focused on, the deal, whether it's in a really badass location where, this thing's just going to be an absolute, home run of a freaking flip, right? Or you're thinking you're getting it at an absolute steal, right? Or you're hungry and you've got the blinders on where all you want to do is ink the contract, right? But you by doing that, you open yourself up to ignoring potential drawbacks of a property.
Yeah. You're wearing your rose-colored glasses looking at a deal, and you're ignoring the blatant red flags. I think the best way to combat this internally is to have somebody who's not financially incentivized to tell you that you're right, review the deal. For example, Kate and I could be a great resource for you. If you're looking at it and you think there may be a chance that you have some confirmation bias on this property, having somebody who's not privy to the conversations, who's new to the property, review it and tell you what they think the right price is a great way to help get those red flags through the rose-colored glasses, so that you make sure you don't make a mistake because you're constantly just looking at the green flags and you're not, counting every single flag that you see.
Yeah, the book calls it finding somebody to be your devil's advocate, right? And exactly like you said, the important thing being it is somebody who has not been privy to the negotiations thus far, right? Having them be as unbiased as possible, right? And like you said, being able to have that person to go to. I know for both of us, just being, in proximity, we usually have each other in a lot of cases be a devil's advocate, right? For each other. If, hey, can I get a second set of eyes on this deal? I think it's a freaking home run, but then, oh shoot, you see something that I may not have seen because I had my rose-colored glasses on that, hey, okay, this changes a little bit how we approach this deal, and it changes, subsequently what price we may be able to pay and what our MAO is. Right?
Yes. The bias number 3 is the sunk cost fallacy. I want to run through the example that they use.
Yeah.
If you're at home, get $100 bill, go find a couple of your friends and propose this game and see what happens. The game requires that the winner gets the $100 bill. Each person is able to bid to get the option to win the $100 bill in $5 increments. And inevitably what ends up happening, I need to clarify one last rule. The person who is second highest in the bid has to pay whatever they offered. So for example, if Cade offers $5 and I offer $10, Cade will have to give $5 for nothing. I will have to give $10, but I will get $100 back. So I made $90 profit. Cade lost $5. What will happen is inevitably you'll get to $95. The two highest bidders will look at each other and one of them will go to 100. At this point, they're making zero profit. The person in second has already offered $95. They will lose $95 guaranteed. Their best logical answer is to offer $105 and still lose $5, but not lose $95. And what ends up happening, they said, is that usually the final sales amount falls within $100 and $1,000. And so you will make money playing this game. I'm actually going to play it at the next drinking event I go to. I think that's a hilarious game to play. But the sunk cost fallacy is when you get in over your heels and instead of cutting the rope and moving on, you keep going. And so I have made this mistake time and time again where, I get a house into contract. The seller goes to back out. Instead of saying, I'm going to take my $1,500 and leave, I say to myself, I've already spent $1,500, plus I've done all this time. Next thing I know, I spend $2,000 getting attorney letters sent, and I still don't get the deal because I say to myself, it's not worth it. I cut rope too late. I should have cut when I could have made $0 profit, but $0 cost. This happens to a lot of people. Don't let yourself get caught up in a bidding war where you're this far, so to speak, and then you still don't get it, or you do get it, and now you lose money on the deal.
Yeah. It's one of the most detrimental things, I think, out of these biases we're talking about. This one can potentially be the most dangerous for somebody, especially, you take, the example you were going through that the book shared. You get caught in what I would equate to like a rat race, right? Like you're already there and you're telling yourself it's too late. I'm here. I'm dedicated. You know what I mean? And so I think being able to have a devil's advocate or being able to take a bird's eye view at stuff before finding yourself caught in this downward spiral is going to be really, really important before it's too late.
Yeah.
All right, let's finish up with our last bias, the negativity bias. And this one is where you tend to give more weight or more importance to the negative facts of the negotiation or experiences as compared to the positive ones in a deal, which can lead you to being overly and dangerously too cautious in a negotiation, right? And I think this is potentially kind of the flip side of the coin to the sunk cost fallacy, where if you're constantly in a state of being overcautious, then you're never going to be able to put a deal together if you're giving more weight to all the negatives instead of looking at the positives, right? It's a mesh of everything. You've got to be able to take a look at the framework, at all of the facts, at everything in all aspects of the negotiation, and be able to put a reasonable deal together without just walking away from the table because you're too focused on the negatives.
And let's also add the most common example I could think of in our industry for the negativity bias is when you get to the end and the seller goes, well, you have to raise your offer or you're not going to get the deal. You are going to have an emotional reaction to that stronger than if he said, you need to raise your offer so that you can get the deal. And one of the ways to negate the negativity bias is in your head when a seller provides a negative comment. Well, you need to, if you don't raise your offer, you're going to lose the deal. Repeat that in your head to yourself. I need to raise my offer to get the deal. If you don't have that same visceral reaction, then ignore the negative comment and move forward as pre-planned. Don't spend your time worrying so much about the loss section. We are, as humans, more likely to avoid losses than we are to take risks for a profit. And so as an investor, you need to understand that. The good news is you can reverse it on a seller. When you're starting a negotiation, lead with proposition value and value adding. And then when you get right down to the wire, then lead with a negative bias. So Cade and I have had this long conversation. We've got so close to a deal. We're off by $5,000 to make this deal work. And I say, you know what, Cade? I'm pretty much maxed out. If you don't want to take this offer, I totally get it. You'll just have to go with a realtor and deal with the repairs and pay the commissions and go that direction. That is a negativity bias where the seller will react more viscerally to me suggesting that he will lose me as the buyer than if I were to continue to try to add value if I've already gone through every value add that I have in the book outside of continuing to raise the price.
Yeah, because then you just you get caught in like a carousel, right? You're just going in circles with the seller and you kind of just arrive at a stalemate, right? And I think that's the important thing that you shared. To break that or avoid that is being able to communicate that in an effective way. All right, part 3, talking about effective negotiation techniques. And as we talk about this, if you're listening and we're talking about it in a more real estate investment focused hat. We did an episode way back when, I don't even remember which number it was, but how to handle your first appointment. I think a lot of these things we're going to talk about, we've talked about in even more depth back on that episode, which we got a lot of great feedback on too. And so I think that's another great episode that you can refer back to kind of add to your arsenal of trying to build your negotiation skills and techniques, right? And so technique number 1 being asking calibrated questions, right? Not just asking, I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this. Not just asking the generic questions that, again, every investor lined up at the door is going to ask, but you've got to fact find a little bit. You've got to dig a little bit deeper than everybody else is digging. You've got to ask specific calibrated questions, and this will become a little bit easier as you build rapport with the seller and understand more of their situation and their feelings. And this is going to become a really powerful tool to make the other party feel understood, valued, and appreciated.
Yeah. The calibrated questions in Never Split the Difference start with questions that start with the words what, how, and sometimes why. And your calibrated questions should be calibrated, as in the term, to get new information, that provides you the opportunity to either understand the seller's concerns more or amplify your propositions. So if, for example, a seller says, I need 200,000, instead of asking, why do you need 200,000, which will inevitably lead to a defensive seller, you say, what are your plans with the 200,000 once we close?
Yeah.
And now they may say, oh, I have to pay off this. I have to do this. My wife has a surgery. I want to go on this trip. Now you have information about what their intentions are. And if you can show how those intentions don't require 200,000, you are going to be more likely to get that seller to drop their price than if you said, why are you asking for 200,000?
Absolutely. And talking about, again, this, piggybacks on, asking calibrated questions. It's giving you a sense of controlling the process, right? While you're in negotiation and fact finding, and being able to take the lead while the negotiations, are being structured. And one, what may seem like a minor piece to some people, but right off the bat, an example we have here is the escrow company and the escrow officer, right? Something that may be of very little importance to the seller, but a very big importance to us as the buyers, right? We have relationships that are solidified with our escrow officers in our preferred escrow company, right? And being able to add that piece and have that benefit to us in the negotiations gives us a lot better control and of the reins while we're going through escrow and negotiations, especially if shit potentially starts to hit the fan. That's where escrow can come in and help big time. And having those people on your side and having control when stuff starts to, go haywire is a really important thing.
Yeah, controlling that is important because, again, like framing, you're deciding what's negotiable and what's not. Jumping into rapport building and empathy. I'm not even going to waste our time talking about this. Every podcast we've ever done talks about developing true empathy for a seller situation and building rapport beyond a transaction. If you want to do a lot of deals, you need to be more than the competition. You need to stand out as an individual. You need to be memorable, and you need to be trusted like a friend.
Absolutely. And wrapping up with the fourth technique, making multiple offers simultaneously, which I kind of equate to a little bit the concept we talked about, which was log rolling, right? And if we take the example of, hey, let's talk about, price and terms and making an offer on the house, but hey, you've got 2 cars sitting there that, you said you want to get rid of. I think that's value that I can create here. Let's talk about those too, and kind of have all of those offers and pistons firing at the same time, to where it may seem like a huge clusterfuck with all this stuff going on, but in reality, because of the framework that you set, you're having control and you have the reins in this negotiation with all of these offers going on and all of these little intricacies and aspects of the negotiation going on at the same time.
Yeah, lean into complexity when negotiating a real estate transaction. There's thousands of things that could go wrong. You can control a lot of it. If you can set up multiple negotiations or offers at the same time, you will discover what pieces of the pie are more influential to the seller than are to you. And then you can log roll those for the seller to get them more of that and you more of whatever you want.
Absolutely.
Let's do the contingency stuff real quick too, because that plays a part.
Yeah.
If you get to a crossroad with a seller where both parties firmly believe that they are correct, the easiest one I can think of is a well. If the seller firmly believes that the well is good and you firmly doubt that because, for example, you called a driller and they said, no, it's not going to be good, you can set up a contingency clause in your offer. Cade, I will pay you $200,000 if the well is working and certified by a third party that we both mutually agree upon. I will pay you $160,000 if in escrow we discover that the well is not in good shape and that it does need to be drilled. And I will pay you $180,000 if the well has water, but it does require a whole new system. And now, if the seller truly believes that that well is good, they will move forward with the 200 offer because they will believe that they are going to get 200. You will be excited because if you firmly believe that the well is not good, you're going to get the price you wanted when there was no other way of doing it. And you're asking the other side to put their money where their mouth is. You're betting on whose information is right. Again, please do your homework before you make offers. Make sure you know your numbers. And if you do, you'll have no problem proposing this.
Absolutely. And another quick example is we, near wrapping up this thing that I can think of is having contingencies built in with your contractors if you're flipping, right? Because, contract timelines are especially important in a flip, right? Especially if we're in the warmer or hotter part of the real estate market, right? Which may be summertime and timelines are always especially important. Building in contingencies to your timelines with your contractors. Hey, if you finish a project earlier than the deadline we mutually agree to set, okay, maybe we pay a little bit more. But hey, if you go later than that deadline we've agreed to set, then hey, it's contingent, that you may have to pay, more if the timeline's extended, right?
You'll get paid less.
Or paid less, excuse me.
Yeah. No, and I think that's key because that means that you can set yourself up, for example, with a bigger company that's more expensive that promise that they're going to get the job done. And you can say, you know what, that's important to me. And I trust that you guys are going to do it. But I'd like to set in a clause that if you take 6 weeks, not 4 weeks, that my price gets reduced by this amount because I have other contractors who are offering me that amount who are upfront telling me it's going to take 6 weeks. And so you can leverage people's own ego that a lot of the time they think that they're always right. And if you've done your research and you know what it's actually going to cost you and you can propose why it will cost you that, you can get better terms in general.
Yeah. As we wrap up, the book wraps up with talking about how to apply all of these in everyday life. And I know we've, in the duration of our podcast that we've been talking about, we've talked about a lot of real estate examples, but all of these are applicable to almost every other aspect of your life, right? You think almost everything is a negotiation, whether it's internal with yourself or external, right? We talk about salary negotiation. We talk about, buying a car instead of buying a house, right? All of these things, all of these concepts, all of these techniques that this book unpacks are universally applicable to almost any situation or any potential negotiation you can think of. And so the book goes into a lot in more detail, but I think it's important to just keep that in the back of your mind, right? These are not mutually exclusive to just one industry or one, type of negotiation. I think this book, dude, just did an exceptional job of just outlining, a playbook, right? It's with, like a dictionary, playbook, almost everything rolled into one where you can take this and apply it almost anywhere and elevate your negotiation skills to the next level.
Yeah. I think if you're in a position where you negotiate frequently, 5 stars out of 5 stars. If you're not, 4.5, because it's a long book.
Yeah.
It's a behemoth of a read. But for 12 hours of our time, it was absolutely worth the knowledge. And I know for a fact that this book will make us over $1 million in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think to recap what we may have shared at the beginning, I think Never Split the Difference is definitely a good prequel to this book. They're in no way, obviously, different authors, not related, but I think, like you said, we recommend this book 5 stars out of 5 stars. We also do recommend, if you have not read Never Split the Difference, to start there and have this be the follow-up. And I think those two books together, I think the value there is astronomical for somebody who's going to be able to read or listen to both of those books.
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks for tuning into the podcast. We will see you guys here next week. We are excited to have a very high producing guest. And so we will catch you on episode 109.
See you guys.